Hello, Spirit House here. Today I'm going to be continuing on with The Secret of Light by Walter Russell, and we are on the chapter of This Magnetic Electric Universe. And this is part two because this is a very long chapter. So I left off with in my last video with the first part of this chapter, and I'm probably going to have to cut it into at least probably 3 videos because it's quite long. But at any rate, I'll begin where I left off in my last video. Every action in nature demonstrates this principle. Okay, let me recap a little bit. Okay. Gravity begins its half cycle as the inward explosive reaction of an outward explosive action, thus fulfilling the law that all opposite expressions are born from each other and interchanged to become the other. It ends its half cycle at a point of rest, at the still point of magnetic light, which centers every material body, whether of microcosmic or macrocosmic dimension. Gravity then ceases when its motion ceases. There is no center of gravity in nature. The centering light of every mass is still magnetic light. Likewise, the still axis of every vortex is still magnetic light. Radiativity then begins its half cycle from that point of rest and ends it on wave field boundary planes of magnetic light where gravity begins. Radiativity then ceases when its motion ceases. Both gravity and radiativity borrow their power to find balance in rest at their journey's end from points of rest of their beginnings. They each repay their separate borrowings to the other at every point of their respective journeys. Each thus perpetually voids itself by giving to the other. At each journey's end, each opposite cancels itself out by giving its all to the other. It is then reborn as the other. Everywhere in nature, each action is its own reaction. Quote, "Death gives to life that life may live, and life gives to death that death may die." From the Divine Iliad, quote, unquote. Every action in nature demonstrates this principle. A ball thrown in the air must start from a point of rest, motivated by energy borrowed from the center of gravity of this earth, which is its fulcrum. The point of rest in the thrower's hand is an extension of the earth's still center. As the ball ascends, it decelerates, as it pays its borrowed energy to space, thus charging space with the borrowings of earth and equally discharging earth. When the borrowing is fully paid, the ball comes to rest. From that point, it must again borrow the energy from space, which it borrowed from Earth to pay for its return to Earth. Upon its accelerative journey to Earth, it passes each point at the same speed it registered on the upward half cycle, thus discharging space and equally charging Earth to balance all borrowings and payings. All actions in nature are extension-retractions from zero to zero and back again to zero. All are balanced simultaneously and sequentially. This is a zero universe of plus and minus zero, which never exceeds the zero of the one light from which it seemingly sprang as multiplicity. The two opposite electric conditions. This zero universe of equilibrium demands two opposed conditions in order to simulate that which our senses interpret for motion and change. These two needed conditions are plus and minus equilibrium, positive and negative electricity. Plus zero means a credit of pressure borrowed from the universal equilibrium to compress a large volume into a small volume. Minus zero means an equal expansion to balance the borrowed compression. $1,000 borrowed from a bank is a plus condition of credit, which is balanced by an equal debit of $1,000. The central zero represents the bank. The extended zeros represent credit and debit. Both are equal but opposite. A credit of $1,000 equals zero. When the credit is paid in part or in full, the debit is proportionally voided simultaneously with the credit. These two opposite conditions of credit and debit correspond with the two opposite conditions of compression and expansion in nature upon which motion is dependent. When an equilibrium pressure is divided into opposite conditions from the zero from which both are extended, motion between the two becomes imperative. They must interchange with each other to void their unbalanced conditions. This is the principle of the electric current. Figure 18, and I still need to find a way to share the figures from this chapter because that's where they begin. So I'm sorry, I'll work on that. Figure 18 represents a room of equal pressure. It's basically a box that shows a battery with a minus and a battery with a positive. Basis of motion, figure 18. Two tanks in it are connected with a tube and petcock. By pumping all the air out of one tank into the other, the two plus-minus conditions have been established, which make motion imperative. Nature always borns each opposite from the other in this manner. By opening the petcock, an outward explosion will take place in the plus tank. An inward explosion of equal potential will take place in the evacuated tank. The plus tank will discharge part of its compressed condition to charge the minus one. The electric battery is the same in principle. In nature, the discharge radiation which explodes outward from the sun simultaneously explodes inward as gravitation. Cause of the universal pulse beat. Matter and space constitute the two conditions necessary for interchange of motion diagrammed in figures 18 and 19, which are batteries, basically, with the one distinguishing difference. That difference is that the two conditions represented by the tanks of the compressed and expanded air and the two cells of the electric battery are equal in volume, while bodies of matter and their surrounding space are unequal in volume. The expanded condition of space is millions of times greater in volume than the compressed condition of its centering body. This explains the seeming mystery of gravitation and radiation, which causes solid objects to fall toward the earth and gases to rise toward space. In the electric battery, the interchange between the two pressure conditions can void both in an explosive flash by a short circuit if the wire connecting both cells is heavy enough. If a small wire connects both cells, the interchange takes time to complete the voidance. Each condition gives to the other in installments, for the wire is not big enough to void both conditions instantly. The consequent giving and re-giving by the two opposite pressures constitute the oscillations of the electric current. Electric interchange by installments is measured and recorded by waves, and the time element of those recordings of interchange are wave frequencies. They constitute the pulse beat of the electric current. When an electric wire pulses with wave frequencies of an electric current, we say that it is a live wire. When it stops pulsing because the current is disconnected, we say that the wire is dead, for it no longer pulses. Excuse me. All nature pulses in measured frequencies with the heartbeat of the universal electric current, as evidenced by universal breathing inward toward bodies and outward toward space. When breathing is switched off in man's body by the cessation of interchange between the two opposite pressure conditions of matter, we say that the man is dead. By solving the mystery of installment interchange between bodies in space, one can more fully comprehend the fact that neither pulse beat, breathings, nor wave frequencies of interchange have any relation whatsoever to life, for they relate only to the principle by means of which life or energy is manifested by motion. The first step in solving this mystery lies in the principle by means of which matter and space become unequal in volume. Figure 20 represents the electric battery with the line AB dividing the two pressure conditions as the equilibrium of both. This line represents a static equator. It shows a upright latitudinal, or it shows an upright longitudinal line AB, which is intersected by a horizontal CD line on a battery, like a car battery, basically. So It says figure 20 represents the electric battery with the line AB dividing the two pressure conditions as the equilibrium of both. And that's the vertical line, separating the positive and negative. This line represents, that's my side note. This line represents a static equator, a plane of rest from which both opposite conditions are extended at right angles as a dynamic equator. Line CD. That says figure 21 represents static and dynamic equators, or magnetic and electric, at 90 degrees from each other, as the two opposed conditions which extend from these planes of rest are equal. The lines of force which connect both are as symmetrical to both diameters as though reflected by mirrors placed at right angles to each other. Such symmetry belongs to the cube and sphere alone. Okay, I guess today I'll post multiple pictures from the figures in a community post. So right after I upload this video, look for a community post with the figures from this chapter. Okay, I'll try and do that. I don't know how else to do it right now. Figure 22 represents the electric battery with a negative cell much larger than the positive cell. The static and dynamic equators will still be at right angles to each other, but the static equator will not be in the middle. It will be much nearer the positive pole and will be curved because lines of force will record the measure of interchange between the two opposite pressures can be symmetrical to the dynamic equator only and not to the static equator. Such symmetry belongs to the radial universe of cone sections, kind of like in a dynamo or a vortex, all dynamic equators are radial, and all lines of force of conic symmetry are forever changing to record the forever changing potential of dynamic equators. Figure 23 illustrates this principle, which forms spheres and creates the illusion which makes heavy objects seem to be attracted radially toward the Earth and tenuous matter thrust radially away from it. Line AB shows the curvature of the static equator, which causes the dynamic equator to expand at its negative end and contract at its positive end into the radii of a cone. The outward thrust of radiative pressures would curve the base of the cone thus produced to correspond with the curvature of its static equator, AB. Figure 24. Figure 24 shows something like kind of like a bar magnet with the same intersections, the vertical line of A to B in the center of the bar magnet, and C and D being both positives with a 0 point at AB. CD are horizontal and are both positives on either end of the bar magnet. Equal interchange, it says. Figure 23 illustrates this principle, which forms spheres and creates the illusion which makes heavy objects seem to be attracted radially towards the Earth and tenuous matter thrust radially away from it. Line AB shows the curvature of the static equator, which causes the dynamic equator to expand at its negative end and contract at its positive end into the radii of a cone. I already read this chapter, this paragraph, but I'm just rereading. The outward thrust of radiative pressures would curve the base of the cone, thus produced to correspond with the curvature of its static equator AB. Figure 24, and that's the one that I just described with a bar magnet, with the 0 point and the two positives at either end. Figure 24 represents a bar magnet which has been divided into the two opposite pressure conditions of this electric universe by coiling a charged wire around the bar of steel, thus forming two opposed plus and minus electrical vortices with intensities measured at poles. Two nails of equal weight are suspended to these poles. It is not magnetism, however, which picks up these nails. It is the electric vortices which pick them up, for the vortices are still effective upon that steel bar, even though the electrically charged wire has been removed. It is the whirlpool motion of the electric vortex which performs the work of lifting those nails and not the stillness of the poles of magnetic light. If the bar magnet is enlarged at one end, it becomes a cone. The division into the two opposed conditions will still be equal, as in figure 25. but the volume will be so large in one as compared to the other that the nail which the positive end will still pick up cannot be lifted by the negative end unless the nail is ground to a fine powder. The negative end will then lift the same weight in total, but only by dividing the nail over the whole volume. Before this principle is applied to matter and space, it is necessary to correct the general impression that the Earth is a magnet. By referring to the bar magnet pictured in Figure 24, it can be seen that its poles alone express gravity. The Earth, on the contrary, expresses gravity at its center. Figure 26. The Earth is formed between magnetic gaps of its waves, as all bodies are formed. Figure 27. And it shows basically like the Earth, the center, and the equatorial and latitude, latitude or longitudinal lines at the poles, A and B. And then, yeah. So, if two bar magnets are placed so that negative and positive ends are near each other, that still point, which we call the center of gravity, will evidence itself between the two ends. If iron filings are placed in its gap, conditions of gravity similar to those of Earth will be found there. Gravity will end and radiation will begin at that center. Nails will fall toward it from any direction, as heavy objects do on Earth, and compass needles will follow the vertical directions of lines of force which extend towards its poles. The analogy between the unequal battery cells and bar magnets is now sufficiently complete to compare them with matter and space. In Figure 28, which it kind of shows like a dynamo with two conical shapes pointing into the center of the Earth, and two negatives on the equatorial plane, kind of like a dynamo. Curvature, and it says Figure 28, curvature increases as potentials divide and multiply. So it's like the equatorial plane with two cones facing inward into the center of gravity. It's the center of Earth. The analogy between the unequal cells and bar magnets is now sufficiently complete to compare them with matter and space. In Figure 28, two bar magnets have been fanned out into cones. The weight which the positive end will pick up as a solid has to be finely divided in order for the expanded volume of the negative end to pick it up. The essential difference between the two opposed pressure conditions of the electric battery and the two of matter and space is that in the battery the opposed potentials are equal because the volumes are equal. In the universal battery of matter and space, the two opposed conditions are conspicuously unequal. The resultant high and low potential contrast each other so violently that solid matter falling toward the high potential of the compressed condition must be divided into vapors and gases before the same substance will fall toward the low potential of the expanded condition. A solid bar of iron will fall radially toward the Earth because both are high potential compressed solids. If divided sufficiently by vaporizing it, that same bar of iron will fall radially toward the heavens. Gravity and radiativity are opposite pressure conditions of the same thing. Both of these pressure conditions are in every creating thing. Every creating thing can expand to lower its potential, or can contract to raise it. Like conditions seek like conditions to find balance. Creating things changing their compressed conditions to expanded conditions must move to find balance in like conditions. That is the sole cause of two-way motion. Every potential has a balanced potential position somewhere in the universe. Desire to find that position is in every creating thing, and any restraint exerted to prevent it from moving to find its balancing potential can be measured as weight. The cause of the radial universe, which constitutes matter and space, lies in the inequality of its two opposite pressure conditions, both as to volume and potential. The cause of the universal pulse beat and the breathing which motivates the manifestation of life in every creating thing lies also in this inequality. All creating things pulse and breathe just as organic life pulses and breathes, but that is not life. It is but motion. And I'm going to stop there and continue with part 3 of the chapter, This Magnetic Electric Universe, which is entitled The Two Opposite Electric Directions, in my next video. I hope you all have a wonderful day. I love you all, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.